Hi everyone, welcome to another recording for Nagel. What is it like to be a bat? Nagel certainly towing the line in terms of making philosophy sound as weird as possible with that name, but hopefully from the last recording or the last section of the reading, you now understand what he was getting at. So just a reminder, the last section sort of finished off with Nagel talking. Well, he goes through this idea of, well, what is it like to be a bat? Because their sensory experience is so removed from ours, navigating with sonar as opposed to vision, that the what it is likeness, or we refer to this as qualia now, the subjective experience of their consciousness must be just completely removed from how we experience our consciousness. We're primarily visual beings, and so a lot of our consciousness is focused on or visuals rather. Um, but bats aren't. And so how must they exist? Well, rather, how much, not how much must they exist, but rather, how must their subjective experience exist? Um, and so Nagel's using this to show that this is an important question because consciousness for him, the qualia of consciousness, particularly the experience of it, that is the integral part of the mind-body debate. And for him, it's the part that the materialists have been ignoring. So this next part of the reading is going to be talking about sort of that idea, about, well, why is it being ignored by the materialists? What is it that they seem to be misunderstanding? So he's going to be talking about a lot about like the subjective versus the objective nature. A good way to think about this is when he's talking about subjective, he's talking about the qualia of the mind. Okay, so that subjective experience, what an image looks like to you in your mind's eye, what it feels like when you hear your favorite song. That's the subjective nature of our experience, and that's the part that Nagel argues the materialists are sort of sidestepping. They're not really dealing with. Whereas the objective nature is the stuff that we can absolutely know about, and it doesn't rely on a specific point of view. So if we go to your favorite song, well, this, I could talk about the collection of notes and the timing and the melodies and, maybe the lyrics and the structure of those lyrics. And, all of these things we can know in an objective way. Okay, I don't need your point of view to be able to talk about all of that stuff. I can have perfect knowledge of the song without your point of view, but I can't have perfect knowledge of your experience of the song outside of your point of view. Okay, so this is the difficulty in bridging that subjective versus objective gap, and Nagel's going to talk about it a bit more here. Um, I'll go ahead and apologize up front because this is probably going to be a long one. The Nagel reading is pretty long. So yeah, strap yourselves in. As it says on the screen there, we're going from page 440, the first paragraph down. So if anyone is inclined. Okay, so highlighters and pens at the ready. And so Nagel's first going to be talking about like the nature of this subject. So what is qualia? What is the consciousness? Okay, so here we go. If anyone is inclined to deny that we can believe in the existence of facts like this, whose exact nature we cannot possibly conceive, he should reflect that in contemplating the bats, we are in much the same position as intelligent bats or Martians would occupy if they tried to form a conception of what it was like to be us. So he's sort of talking about the idea of, well, um, for anyone who's discounting um, the existence of this qualia in other beings, like the existence of this problem. So he's really talking about the materialists here who are really ignoring the problem of consciousness. Then maybe try imagining it from the other point of view. Imagine yourself an intelligent alien or an intelligent bat. Um, you have you're now observing humans. Is there a part to these humans that you wouldn't be able to explain in an objective way just by measuring and viewing them? Is there a part of their experience that you would miss by doing that? And of course, the answer is yes, you would miss their consciousness. Even with advanced alien technology that allows for perfect brain scanning, arguably this would still miss the what it is likeness um, to humanity, what it is like to be you. Uh, Okay, so the footnotes scattered throughout, some of them are just references, others are Nagel explaining himself a little bit more clearly. So you see here where it's got Martians. He says, any intelligent extraterrestrial beings totally different from us. So that's what he's going to talk about Martians and aliens a little bit, just to use them as an example. Um, what he really means by this is imagine a intelligent being at least comparably intelligent to you, if not more intelligent, but that is not human. Okay, that is fundamentally different from us. They do not experience things in the same sensory way that we do, so completely removed from our existence. Okay, but intelligent. So they are able to problem solve, they are able to measure and to develop theories and all of that sort of stuff. That's what he means when he uses the word Martian or alien. So it's not as science fictiony as it might sound. Okay. Um, the structure of their own minds might make it impossible for them to succeed, but we know they would be wrong to conclude that there is not anything precise that it is like to be us. Uh, so yeah, again, here Nagel is saying it's perfectly imaginable that an alien would measure us, and because of the way that they experience their world, it would actually be impossible for them to understand our subjective experience of self. Okay, our consciousness, our qualia. Okay, that's perfectly comprehensible. But importantly, we would know that there's something that they're missing. There's something about the human experience that they are missing. And that's important because now we're the ones being observed. If it seems ridiculous that like a bat um, has internal processes, well, okay, Nagel disagrees with you that it is ridiculous, but okay, fine. But it's undeniable that you do, surely. So imagine someone looking at you. Imagine an alien life form that doesn't experience the world in any of the ways that you do, but in a totally different way. It's made of a totally different structure. Um, it doesn't have a brain in the way that our brain is, a completely different being, but an intelligent one. Just by observing you, it would not get an understanding of your internal experience, even with advanced observation. Okay. That only certain general types of mental state could be ascribed to us. Perhaps perception and appetite would be concepts common to us both. Perhaps not, as in common to us both, common to humans and aliens, he's talking about there. We know they would be wrong to draw such a skeptical conclusion because we know what it is like to be us. And we know that while it includes an enormous amount of variation and complexity, and while we do not possess the vocabulary to describe it adequately, its subjective character is highly specific and in some respects describable in terms that can be understood only by creatures like us. Okay. Um, to get all corny for a moment, a great example of this is the experience of love. Okay. There's been a million poems and a million love songs written to try and express what love is, but none of them are the same as love. If you've experienced love, then you know what I'm talking about. Okay. Um, no matter how many love songs someone listens to, when they do fall in love with someone, whether it's a pet or their child or a partner or whoever, but when they actually do fall in love with someone, um, they will learn something. There's something different about it. Despite the fact that they've listened to every love song and read every poem on love, spoken to every expert about love, know all of the neurobiology of love, um, there'll still be something that's missing. Okay. And this is the point that Nagel's making here. Perhaps you have to be a creature like us to actually know what love is. Okay. Um, so yeah, to be understood only by creatures like us. So perhaps, you know, this is something uniquely human. Perhaps an alien who doesn't experience things like we do would never experience love. Um, the fact that we cannot ever the fact that we cannot expect ever to accommodate in our language a detailed description of Martian or bat phenomenology should not lead us to dismiss as meaningless the claim that bats and Martians have experience fully comparable in richness of detail to our own. So just because we can't explain clearly, when Nagel uses the word phenomenology, he's talking about that inner phenomenon. So your inner qualia, the experience of your perception. Okay. So just because we can't explain in our language the inner experience of a bat doesn't mean that bats don't have experience. Doesn't mean that they don't have that inner qualia. Okay. It doesn't mean it's not real just because we can't explain it, because we don't have the words to explain it. It would be fine if someone would develop concepts and a theory that enabled us to think about those things, but such an understanding may be permanently denied to us by the limits of our nature. And to deny the reality or logical significance of what we can never describe or understand is the crudest form of cognitive dissonance. So, this is a bit of a swipe at the materialist, or sort of like a warning swipe. He's saying, if this is what you're doing, then you're doing something really bad. What he's saying is, it's a really, really, really arrogant form of bias to say that something you don't understand mustn't exist. Okay, so because you can't understand it means it's not there. Um, Now, we most often see this used in like religious arguments where, the passionate atheist is arguing with the believer, and quite often the believer will level this at them. Okay, just because you can't understand God doesn't mean that God necessarily doesn't exist, and it's extreme arrogance on our part if we believe that we are so perfect that we can understand everything, and so therefore whatever we can't understand mustn't exist. Um, Perhaps there are some things that are just outside of human understanding, and maybe always will be. If we're not willing to accept that, then we are falling into this arrogant bias, this cognitive dissonance. And this is where we're going wrong. Perhaps the problem is not in the nature of the subject itself, of consciousness and qualia. Perhaps the problem is in us and the way that we approach knowledge. Uh, Perhaps the problem is that we think we can understand everything when maybe we're not actually made to understand everything. Maybe we're not capable of understanding everything. And maybe qualia is one of the things that falls in the column of things we will never understand. Okay, maybe. Nagel's not, just to be clear, Nagel's not saying we will never understand it. He's just saying that it is possible. This seems to be the type of thing that we will never understand. Okay. Um, this brings us to the edge of a topic that requires much more discussion than I can give it here, namely the relation between facts on the one hand and conceptual schemes or systems of representation on the other. So Nagel's sort of dipping his toe into the epistemology of this. So for those of you who have forgotten from last year, or those of you who are new to us this year, epistemology is basically the study of knowledge. How do we know things? What is it to know something? Can we ever know something? Okay, so this is the branch of philosophy called epistemology. Obviously, this is touching onto that because he's saying, well, there may actually be some things that we'll never know. So this is an epistemological question. He's not really going to go into it too much. For our purposes, looking at the mind-body debate, the only important thing we need to know about epistemology is that Nagel is presenting the idea that there are some things that are outside of our understanding, okay, that we may never be able to know about, okay. Um, my realism about the subjective domain in all its forms implies a belief in the existence of facts beyond the reach of human concepts. So this is what we're talking about. Certainly, it is possible for a human being to believe that there are facts which humans never will possess, the requisite concepts to represent or comprehend. Indeed, it would be foolish to doubt this given the finiteness of humanity's expectations. So he's saying we're not infinite beings, like our brain is only so big and can only do so much. Yes, it can do a lot, but it can only do so much. It it seems likely that there will be some things that are simply outside of our understanding. Um, After all, there would have been transfinite numbers even if everyone had been wiped out by the Black Death before Cantor discovered them. So he's using an example here, and mathematical principles are a good one to use. The idea, this sort of harks to the question of, is mathematical theory discovered or is it developed? In other words, does it exist before we think about it? Nagel is presenting the idea that it does exist. We discover mathematical principles, we don't make them. So transfinite numbers, for those of you who aren't into your maths, that's fine. It's just a mathematical theory. You can transplant it with really any mathematical theory, Pythagoras' theorem, anything. Okay. Uh, that that existed, that principle existed before we were aware of it. So there was something around that, for example, with Pythagoras' theorem, allowed us to understand a triangle before we actually knew of that theory. So there was knowledge sort of floating around out there, for lack of a better term, that we hadn't become aware of yet. So it's perfectly perceivable that there's lots of things that do have an explanation that we haven't yet developed an understanding of, and perhaps never will develop an understanding of. Okay. Um, but one might also believe that there are facts which could not ever be represented or comprehended by human beings, even if the species lasted forever, simply because our structure does not permit us to operate with concepts of this requisite type. So there may be things we will never know simply because of the way that we are structured. This impossibility might even be observed by other beings, but it is not clear that the existence of such beings or the possibility of their existence is a precondition of the significance of the hypothesis that there are humanly inaccessible facts. So really, whether aliens exist or not, and whether they experience this or not, is irrelevant to the question of whether we experience it. Nagel thinks that we do. There are some things that we A, don't know, and B, never will know. After all, the nature of beings with access to humanly inaccessible facts is presumably itself a humanly inaccessible fact. So Nagel's basically pointing out that we may never know whether there are other intelligent beings. This may be an inaccessible fact. And this is actually a good example. We can theorize that alien life exists, but if you've ever heard sort of the theory of the likelihood of alien life, where you look at the number of stars, the number of planets that orbit stars, the number of planets that could potentially support life that orbit stars, then we're looking at millions of potential planets where life might exist, and particularly millions that may have intelligent life, not just things like bacteria. But we may never actually know that. That may be a humanly inaccessible fact. Nothing we can do may ever actually reveal that to us. We may never develop a technology that allows us to sort of scan, for lack of a better word, for life in our universe. So this is the example that he's using, and it's a clever one. Reflection on what it is like to be a bat seems to lead us, therefore, to the conclusion that there are facts that do not consist in the truth of propositions expressible in a human language. We can be compelled to recognize the existence of such facts without being able to state or comprehend them. So we can say that these things exist, even though we don't understand them. Okay. I shall not pursue this subject, however. Its bearing on the topic before us, namely the mind-body problem, is that it enables us to make a general observation about the subjective character of experience, about qualia. Whatever may be the status of facts about what it is like to be a human being or a bat or a Martian, these appear to be facts that embody a particular point of view. So Nagel here is showing that perhaps in order to explain what it is like to be a bat, you must hold the perspective of a bat. And this is a really important point. Okay. Basically, what he's saying is perhaps we will never know certain things because we can never escape our own subjective point of view. All right. So perhaps there is an objective explanation for our mind, but because we can never escape our subjective perspective, we'll never be able to know that. Okay. I'm not adverting here to the alleged privacy of experience to its possessor. The point of view in question is not one accessible only to a single individual. Rather, it is a type. It is often possible to take up a point of view other than one's own. So the comprehension of such facts is not limited to one's own case. There is a sense in which phenomenological facts are perfectly objective. One person can know or say of another what the quality of the other's experience is. They are subjective, however, in the sense that even this objective assumption, ascription rather, of experience is possible only for someone sufficiently similar to the object of ascription to be able to adopt his point of view. So, what have we said here? Let's go back to love. Baby, don't hurt me. What Nagel is saying is he's not saying this is not him using the privileged access argument. Okay, so don't confuse it with privileged access, that no one will ever be able to access your consciousness. What he's saying is that perhaps we can broaden this out, and there's sort of like a privileged access for types of being. So humans have a privileged access, bats have a privileged access, not only to themselves individually, but at like a species level. So if we talk about love, someone who has been in love knows what we mean when we talk about love. Okay, because they've had that experience, they know. All right, and my language might fail me when I'm expressing it, and all of the sappiest love songs maybe have never quite done it justice, but we know what it's like. Okay, and we know what they're getting at when they when they do write these sorts of songs. And so this is the point that that Nagel is making. Perhaps I can know when you talk about love, perhaps I can know what you mean by that. I can know what you mean by your subjective perspective of love because I am subjectively close enough to you. Okay, I am also human, and so therefore our species link means that our experience is similar enough that I can understand your subjective perspective. Okay, if we compared that to a bat, they are not similar enough in their experience. Okay, so even understanding things at an objective level requires a certain point of view, requires a certain subjectiveness. To understand the ascription in the first person as well as in the third, so to speak, the more different from oneself the other experiencer is, the less success one can expect with this enterprise. In our own case, we occupy the relevant point of view, but we will have as much difficulty understanding our own experience properly if we approach it from another point of view, as we would if we tried to understand the experience of another species without taking up its point of view. Okay, so what we're really saying here is the objective understanding is actually subjective, as it relies on the viewer, the observer, being sufficiently similar to its subject. I will never understand a bat, the inner workings of a bat, the qualia of a bat, but if I'm similar enough to you that I may be able to get an understanding of your qualia. It doesn't mean that I experience your qualia, but I may be able to get an understanding of it. So there's a certain subjectiveness to objectiveness. This is what Nagel is saying. We have to be able to adopt a certain point of view that is similar to what we're observing. And if we can't do that, then we'll probably never be able to explain their experience. All right. Nagel sort of moves on now to the gap between the physical explanation and the actual phenomenon itself. So remember, when we're talking about the phenomenon or phenomenology, he's talking about experience, inner experience, okay, qualia. Um, so, uh, so Nagel's going to talk here about why he doesn't think that this can be a physical thing. Okay. Now, pay attention here. Doesn't think it could be a physical thing. It may be, but he doesn't think that's the likely explanation. This bears directly on the mind-body problem. For if the facts of experience, facts about what it is like for the experiencing organism, are accessible only from one point of view, then it is a mystery how the true character of experiences could be revealed in the physical operation of that organism. So, in other words, if I have to adopt the point of view of a bat, then obviously to understand its nature is not simply to understand its physical form. Because I don't need to be a bat to understand the physical nature of a bat. We have a very good understanding of the physical nature of all animals that we've studied. Um, we understand their internal workings. We understand their sensory receptors. I understand the physiology of a bat, but if I have to be a bat to understand what it is to be a bat, then obviously not everything is physical. Okay, there must be something outside of the physiology. Um, the latter is a domain of objective facts par excellence, the kind that can be observed and understood from many points of view and by individuals with differing perceptual systems. Um, so I'm just has revealed a mystery how true character of experience could be revealed in the physical operation of that organism. So when Nagel talks about par excellence here, he's talking about basically like the best theory. Okay, something that is insurpassable. So the physical explanation of the biology of a bat is the best possible theory we can have. Like until something much better comes about, it is near perfect. Okay. And so we shouldn't be ascribing to anything else to explain it. We should just be using the physiological understanding we've got. But let's not think that that means we now have an understanding of the consciousness. Okay. There are no comparable imaginative obstacles to the acquisition of knowledge about bat neurophysiology by human scientists. And intelligent bats or Martians might learn more about the human brain than we ever will. Now, this is an important point that Nagel is making here when he says intelligent bats or Martians might learn more about the human brain than we ever will. Yeah, it's yeah, if we think about the case of alien life or extraterrestrial life forms, their technology for them to come to Earth would their technology would be far more developed than ours, because simply being able to travel that far means that they have got some form of technological development that at the moment we certainly don't. So it's actually quite likely that they would arrive here and we would seem like cavemen, rubbing sticks together and hitting each other with rocks to them. Their level of technological development would be far greater than ours. So it's possible that they'd get here and almost instantly be able to develop a better understanding of our own brain physiology than uh, than we have, and perhaps than we ever will. So we can what he's saying here is we can imagine having a perfect understanding of this sort of physiology, but it doesn't reveal the subjective nature of that physiology. Okay. All right, over the page. This is not by itself an argument against reduction. A Martian scientist with no understanding of visual perception could understand the rainbow or lightning or clouds as physical phenomena, though he would never be able to understand the human concepts of rainbow, lightning, or cloud, or the place these occupy in our phenomenal world. Okay, so uh, again, this is sort of a direct swipe at materialists like Smart or physicalists like Smart. He's using the example of lightning quite purposefully here, because what he's pointing out is that no matter what how much understanding we have that lightning is simply the electrical discharge of ionized particles, um, that isn't the same as what it is like to experience lightning. Okay, the phenomenon of lightning is not the same as the electrical charge. It is actually a different thing. Now, Smart talked about this in his reading and basically said it's not a different thing. Um, Nagel is saying that it is. And remember, Nagel's entire perspective is that the materialists are too reductionist in the way that they approach the mind body problem. They ignore or they discount the most difficult parts, which he would certainly be saying Smart has done. Okay. The objective nature of the things picked out by these concepts could be apprehended by him because although the concepts themselves are connected with a particular point of view and a particular visual phenomenology, the things apprehended from that point of view are not. They are observable from the point of view, but external to it. Hence, they can be comprehended from other points of view also, either by the same organisms or by others. So this is a bit of a confusing little part here. What it's saying is that the inner experience does rely on certain objective principles. So, for example, the reason that all humans seem to have a very similar experience of things like lightning, that awe that we hold lightning in and the wonder that we have of it, that's pretty universal, culturally universal. Why? Well, perhaps it's simply because we're all approaching it from a similar enough point of view that we get a similar enough experience of it. Okay, the phenomenon of lightning, um, rather the physical bolt of lightning, the electrical discharge, has a similar phenomenological experience for all of us who have a similar point of view. So an alien may develop a perfect understanding of the physics of lightning, but unless they're able to adopt our point of view, our perspective, and remember, we're not talking about an individual one here, we're sort of talking about a species-wide perspective, they might never experience that wonder and awe we have when we see lightning. Lightning has an objective character that is not exhausted by its physical appearance and that can be investigated by a Martian without vision. To be precise, it has a more objective character than is revealed in its visual appearance. So this is, lightning has a certain physical reality to it, an objective reality to it, which is the explanation of it, that it is the electrical discharge of ionized water particles in the sky. Okay. In speaking of the move from subjective to objective characterization, I wish to remain non-committal about the existence of an endpoint. The completely objective intrinsic nature of the thing, which one might or might not be able to reach. It may be more accurate to think of objectivity as a direction in which the understanding can travel. And in understanding a phenomenon, the lightning is and in understanding a phenomenon like lightning, it is legitimate to go as far away as one can from a strictly human point of view or viewpoint. Um, so what Nagel's talking about here, that there are elements to lightning that we cannot explain simply by measuring it and viewing it. There's a certain phenomenon that occurs, okay, and it occurs perhaps within us, um, but that is not the same as seeing the lightning, hearing the thunder, okay? The experience of the wonder is not the same as seeing it. Uh, in the case of experience, on the other hand, the connection with a particular point of view seems much closer. It is difficult to understand what could be meant by the objective character of an experience, apart from the particular point of view from which its subject apprehends it. So basically what Nagel is saying is the materialists are trying to develop an objective nature of something that is necessarily subjective. Consciousness is a subjective thing. Okay, it is unique to all of us as far as we know at least, and it is inescapably individual. Uh, by that, what I mean is I can't escape my consciousness. I can't enter the consciousness of someone else, and someone else can't enter my consciousness. And so it is uniquely individual. And yet the materialists are trying to develop an understanding of it that is universal, that is objective. Perhaps this is why they're failing. They don't actually understand the item that they're trying to explain. Um, After all, what would be left of what it was like to be a bat if one removed the viewpoint of the bat? But if experience does not have, in addition to its subjective character, an objective nature that can be apprehended from many different points of view, then how can it be supposed that a Martian investigating my brain might be observing physical processes which were my mental processes, as he might observe physical processes which were bolts of lightning, only from a different point of view? How, for that matter, could a human physiologist observe them from another point of view? Uh, so, what Nagel's really saying is no matter how much digging around we do physically in the brain, it we're, it seems unlikely that we're ever going to find, for lack of a better word, consciousness and qualia, actually find the experience. No matter how perfectly the Martian that's investigating my brain is able to explain the processes of it, able to explain the function of it, no matter how perfect that explanation becomes, there is still the phenomenon of consciousness missing. Um, okay. We appear to be, and so last little bit for this one. Nagel is going to now talk about when reductionism works, like when is it suited to a certain field, to try and show why he thinks it's not suited to this one. Okay. We appear to be faced with a general difficulty about psychophysical reduction, so about the materialist reductionism. In other areas, the process of reduction is a move in the direction of greater objectivity towards a more accurate view of the real nature of things. So this is good reductionism, when we get a better explanation that isn't reliant on a perspective or a point of view. It's just true all the time. Uh, this is accomplished by reducing our dependence on individual or species-specific points of view towards the object of investigation. We describe it not in terms of the impressions it makes on our senses, but in terms of its more general effects and of properties detectable by means other than the human senses. So we'll pause here because you might be thinking, well, what is able to be revealed to us outside of the human senses? Well, I'm glad you asked that, because mathematics is the perfect example of something that is made clear to us outside of the human senses. Let's take geometry, just basic geometry for a moment. We understand things about a triangle, the nature, objective nature of a triangle, whether we've experienced one or not. Okay, if I was born into a room, the classic sort of no stimuli except being taught about geometric principles, then I could still have a perfect understanding of a triangle. An objective understanding of a triangle, the way that the angles interact with each other, the sort of the laws of a triangle, so that it must be a three-sided shape with three corners. These are the rules of a triangle, and I can understand all of that whether I've seen one or not. So, and more importantly, even if an alien life form that is completely separate from us and different to us comes to this earth, it will not change what a triangle is. A triangle is still a triangle. The sum of its internal angles still equal 180 degrees. It is still a shape that must have three and only three sides. It's still a shape that must have and can only have three corners. Okay, these are all necessary truths of what a triangle is. So we can objectively understand something like mathematical principles, regardless of point of view. Doesn't matter whose eyes we're looking at them through. There is a truth, an objective truth to things like geometry. And this is why reductionism works really well, because it allows us to move closer to this objective truth. Okay, it allows us to get closer to this perfect, unbiased, perspective that's not based on a point of view. It is universal. Whether you're a Martian or a bat or a human, a triangle is a shape with three sides. Um, the less it depends on a specifically human viewpoint, the more objective is our description. It is possible to follow this path because although the concepts and ideas we employ in thinking about the external world are initially applied from a point of view that involves our perceptual apparatus, they are used by us to refer to things beyond themselves, towards which we have the phenomenal point of view. Therefore, we can abandon it in favor of another and still be thinking about the same things. So, whilst we might start off studying things like triangles by drawing them out, and then manipulating that, so we are actually experiencing it from our own point of view, it gets to a point where there is a truth beyond our point of view. Okay, the universal truth of triangles and that sort of thing. Okay, that's what he's talking about here. Whilst we might initially approach it from our point of view, we do get to a point where it exists outside of point of view, okay, an objective truth. Experience itself, however, does not seem to fit the pattern. The idea of moving from appearance to reality seems to make no sense here. What is the analog in this case to pursuing a more objective understanding of the same phenomena by abandoning the initial subjective viewpoint towards them in favor of another that is more objective but concerns the same thing? Certainly, it appears unlikely that we will get closer to the real nature of human experience by leaving behind the particularity of our human point of view and striving for a description in terms accessible to beings that could not imagine what it was like to be us. So this is why he thinks reductionism is not well suited for explaining human consciousness, explaining qualia, because it is necessarily subjective. You must have a human perspective, a human point of view to understand human qualia. In the same way that if an alien comes down to this planet, I will never understand its internal consciousness. Okay, because I am so fundamentally different from it that I couldn't comprehend it. Or to use the example that Nagel's given, I will never be able to understand the internal processes of a bat, like the what it is likeness of a bat. If the subjective character of experience is fully comprehensible only from one point of view, then any shift to greater objectivity, that is, less attachment to a specific point of view, does not take us nearer to the real nature of the phenomenon. It takes us further away from it. And so this is the sort of what Nagel's throwing at the materialists here, that they're actually moving us further away from an understanding of consciousness. Because to understand my experience, you must be able to adopt my point of view, my perspective. Okay? You simply must. To use an example of this, it's not a particularly pleasant one, but think of someone with PTSD. You can't possibly comprehend what they're going through when they're having a bout of anxiety or a panic attack, for example. You can't possibly understand what they're going through because you haven't got their experiences. To understand them, you must be able to adopt their point of view. You must be able to sort of walk in their shoes, get a rough idea of what it must have been like to go through the trauma that they did, and then that will help you to illuminate the experience of their PTSD, the experience of their panic attack. But if you can't do that, then there is no way that you will ever be able to understand their experience. And in this way, the more that the materialists encourage us to let go of this idea that there's a essentially subjective nature to us, that there is a uniqueness to us, the more that they move us towards an objective view of ourselves, the further away we're actually getting from truly understanding ourselves. In a sense, the seeds of this objection to the reducibility of experience are already detectable in successful cases of reduction. For in discovering sound to be, in reality, a wave phenomenon in air or other media, we leave behind one viewpoint to take up another, and the auditory, human or animal viewpoint that we leave behind remains unreduced. So For example, well, the example that he's giving here is sound. Now, for a long time, we didn't understand how sound worked. Like, how do we hear? What is sound? Um, but we've always understood the experience of sound. Okay, we've always had that experience. The qualia of sound has never been a mystery to each of us. Um, but what sound actually is has been. We now have an understanding of what sound is. The wave explanation of sound, and we even have an explanation now of how we perceive it. The eardrum and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The different like physical processes. We understand all of that. Now that hasn't actually reduced the qualia of sound. Nothing has changed there. We just have a better explanation of the objective side of sound. Okay, how sound is made and how it is processed, but not what it is like to process it. Okay, not what it is like to hear. How we hear has been explained, but not what it is like to hear. Okay, so the actual phenomenon hasn't been reduced, which Nagel likes. Members of radically different species may both understand the same physical events in objective terms, and this does not require that they understand the phenomenal forms in which those events appear to the senses of members of other species. Thus, it is a condition of their referring to a common reality that their more particular viewpoints are not part of the common reality that they both apprehend. The reduction can succeed only if the species-specific viewpoint is omitted from what is to be reduced. So, what Nagel's really saying here is that the conclusion seems almost obvious or inescapable now. If you want to develop an objective explanation of self, and by that, what he's really saying is if you want to develop a purely physical explanation of self, the only way that that can be done is by removing the point of view nature of self. And that would be ignoring consciousness, qualia. Okay. Now, again, there are those who say that perhaps these things don't exist, but I mean, you have qualia. You know your consciousness. You know that it does exist. It does have reality. Daniel Dennett is a classic one for it's just not there. We're putting things in, the ghost in the machine. We're putting things in that aren't actually there. Well, maybe we are. Maybe Dennett is right, and smart for that matter. But for Nagel, this is reductionism gone too far. You can't just get rid of the most difficult part of the question and claim that you have answered the question. Okay, you're not getting full marks for that. All right, so we'll leave that one there. As I said, sorry, it's a long one, but part 4 to come. And yeah, hopefully you're enjoying it and getting a better understanding of what it truly is to be a bat or an alien or a Martian or whatever. All right, have a great day. Like and subscribe, including you, Gemma. And yeah, take it easy. See you next time.